Hello and welcome to Bounding Into Comics. My name is John Trent. I am the founder and editor-in-chief at Bounding Into Comics. Today I got a Star Wars story for you about Leslye Headland and her comments about Rian Johnson. So Star Wars showrunner Leslye Headland recently implied that Rian Johnson is a Star Wars heretic. Headland talked about Star Wars in her upcoming show with YouTuber Fantastic Frankie, and she specifically described Johnson, or at least implied that he is a Star Wars heretic. So we're going to provide some context here. Headland's comments came after she was asked what her favorite dream project was. She made it rather clear it is the upcoming Star Wars project. She explained, working for Lucasfilm, working on Star Wars IP is my dream project. That is 100%. That is all I want to do. Whenever I have creative phone calls about it with my team or with the team at Lucas, I just have to kind of almost put a timer on the amount of time I'm talking, because I will just talk for so long about the tiniest piece of origin story or a particular geographical location. I will just go on, and I'll look up and I'll be like, I've been talking for 3 minutes straight or 5 straight about this. I have to stop talking. Headland then stated, I've never been so happy but also challenged. That's the other thing. I think that sometimes when people think dream project, they think maybe something cushy or something. Headland then went on to discuss the challenge of the show and the respect she has for Star Wars. She stated, I see this as a massive challenge to take on and a very serious one, and I have an immense amount of respect for the world George built, but also canon. In Legends and canon, there is a lot of stuff there. Not to take any of that lightly and like, hey, I'm going to bring my thing into that. I think that would be a mistake. It feels like I'm joining almost a religion. So before we go any further, I want to comment on this here. This actually sounds like great rhetoric. She's talking about being faithful to what George Lucas has built, even the stuff that people have built outside of that, specifically in Legends and canon, and that she's wanting to stay faithful to that, or at least that's the implication there. So I think that's like actually a pretty good thing. Whether or not what we get is whether or not the actual product is another story, but that is something for her to say that is good, and I kind of I do like that. So then she went on to say, she's talking about Star Wars being a religion. She says, I mean, it's funny, I was using that as an analogy with the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm. With that acquisition, it was kind of where the Catholic Church was in 1400. I think she misspoke there. She's referring to 1500, because she goes on to say, this is where she kind of goes on to say that, where she implies that Rian Johnson is a heretic by comparing him to Martin Luther. So for those who don't know, Luther was famously accused of heresy by Pope Leo X in a papal bull, and ordered him to recant his heresies or face excommunication. Luther did not recant, and in fact he went on to make a public display by burning the papal bull that he received. Pope Leo X responded by declaring Luther a heretic and excommunicated him in January 1521. Luther would then be declared an outlaw by the Holy Roman Empire at the Imperial Diet of Worms in April 1521. So Headland says, you've got Rian Johnson as Martin Luther posting stuff to the front of the church, and everyone's like, no! And the other half is like, yes! So that's kind of the implication there, that Rian Johnson's a heretic, comparing him to Martin Luther. I don't think she's right about everyone. I think she's right about everyone saying no, because most people were saying no. The other half is definitely a minority who enjoyed that film. I think for the most part, most people did not like Johnson's The Last Jedi. You look at all of the review sites, Rotten Tomatoes, I think it's like 30% or 40% rotten. So that's definitely not half. That's a lot less than half. But yeah, I just found that funny. She's the upcoming showrunner, and she's kind of crapping on Rian Johnson, calling him a Star Wars heretic, and that he didn't really follow the canon of Star Wars, which he did not. And I've talked about that on numerous occasions. But this is really interesting too. So Headland went on to say, you can't enter this world without having a very strong point of view, but also having an enormous amount of reverence, as if you were stepping into a cathedral. If you're stepping into Notre Dame, we're getting more of that Catholicism there. Notre Dame is a Catholic cathedral. You have to have an enormous amount of imagination. You have to have your own point of view. You have to know what these ethos mean to you, but you also can't pretend you are not standing in Notre Dame. You have to be like, this is it, this is it. That's true, that's correct. You can't just imagine that Notre Dame isn't this glorious Catholic cathedral, and instead it's maybe just like your local diner or something. That doesn't work. You're not living in reality. So I agree with her there too. And that's kind of what Disney has really done with Star Wars, though. They've made it something that it really isn't. And they really need to get back to that and realize that they're in Star Wars and not in some your generic science fiction or whatever. Interestingly enough, Johnson has seemingly also stated himself that he was uninterested in Star Wars canon. I reported this back in March 2020 when he spoke with The Hollywood Reporter. He said, I don't really think in terms of universes or in terms of creating worlds or whatever. That's not that interesting to me. The only thing that is interesting to me is story, and the story specific to like whether you are writing a Star Wars film that's part of a 3-movie trilogy or a quote-unquote original thing like Knives Out. You are still telling a story that is new to the thing that you're doing, that it has to work within the context of that movie. So to me, the notion of what's the entire galaxy or world that you are creating or something, I can't imagine getting excited about creating that. To me, what I'm excited about is creating a 2-hour-long experience for an audience to have in the theater. And that means how they engage moment to moment with the story and the characters that are on the screen, and that doesn't change in either one of those. The problem with this answer is that you are working within the context of Star Wars. It's not just within the context of that singular film. There are things that preceded that film that should dictate how your film, how the rules of your film will work. Like there's things like the Force that have very specific rules applied to them that George Lucas has done in the original trilogy, and then expanded upon in the prequel trilogy, and then even more so a little bit in, I would even, maybe not a little bit, but a lot more in the Clone Wars animated show. So there are things that you need to have context, not just from that singular movie, but from the overarching story of Star Wars. The Force doesn't just all up and change because Rian Johnson happens to be directing, even though that's kind of what he did. The same with the dogfights and how ships would react, and that he introduced this like absolute idiotic idea of the hyperspace attack, which just would not work. Otherwise, the threat of the Death Star wouldn't exist, because you would just hyperspace attack it and it's blown up, right? No, that's not how it works. I do want to go on and talk a little bit more about what Headland said in this interview. She would discuss her passion, and I think these are things that I found really interesting. Puts her in a little bit of a different light, I think, from what we've seen before, where she was calling white women the problem in Hollywood, the silent killer, I think is what she described them as, where she kind of, in this, she discusses her Star Wars fandom and how she had like an on-again, off-again relationship with Star Wars, which I think a lot of people might have had that, some more so than others. And then she also kind of discusses a little bit about like how she's going about creating her show. So later in the interview, she would discuss her passion for Star Wars, saying, "Listen, I was already a big fan. Of course, growing up, I was a huge fan. But I would say with the advent of YouTube, that was really when I started getting into Star Wars again." Because I was in my early 20s during the prequels. I went to see them all opening night because I needed to know what happened. But I would say I didn't really immerse myself as much as when the original trilogy was touching me as a kid. Because then I was reading Heir to the Empire and Timothy Zahn books. I was kind of getting into it a little bit more as a teenager. I kind of put it down as the prequels. I just didn't feel like I was the audience for the prequels, except that I was a Star Wars fan. But it was really in the advent of YouTube that I started to get reinvested in Star Wars again. So I found that really interesting there. She actually admits that she might not have been the audience for the prequels, and that Star Wars might have a specific audience for people. Shocking that a Lucasfilm employee would kind of admit that. It's kind of been the opposite of what we've seen from a lot of them. So she's actually saying that she might not have been the audience for the prequels. So Headland went on to say, and kind of realized that, oh my gosh, there's this whole other world on that I didn't realize, and that's how we got introduced to Clone Wars and Dave Filoni, and started to consume the comics and started to consume the video games in a way that I hadn't when I was younger. I just got more into it in a way that I hadn't when I was running around my 20s, as documented via Bachelorette. But there was something about the user engagement and the fandom that I got really invested in and I really loved consuming. The fandom was actually my way back into Star Wars, to be honest. That's just around the time of the Disney acquisition of The Force Awakens. I just got back in just as we were going to start getting more Star Wars. So I found that really interesting too. She's crediting her passion for Star Wars due to the fandom of Star Wars that was already existed, and they kind of brought that passion into her as well. It's kind of similar to what we've seen from Jon Favreau, where he's kind of reaching out in his public statements and respecting all of Star Wars fandom, rather than people like Rian Johnson, who are just crapping over Star Wars fans, calling them man babies, and implying all kinds of weird, crazy conspiracies about why people did not like his Last Jedi film, rather than just taking taking the actual criticism that was there. He created conspiracies on why people did not like it, and we've well documented on Bounding into Comics. So then Headland kind of went into how she pitched her show. In the video, she pulls up the Star Wars The Essential Atlas. And stated, so every pitch starts here. Where are we? It starts with, where are we? Like, where are we? Because I think that is how I always anchor myself within this particular world. You can't just start with, I have a cool emotional idea, I have a cool concept I'd like to explore. Those are all great. Keep them up there. But then she goes on to say, Star Wars is an actual world with actual places. Where are you and who's there? And how much do we know about who's there? And how much do we not know? And based on what we know about who's there, what can we infer from the political economic structure of that place? And then how does that dovetail into the story you want to tell? For me, it's less about going through the Star Wars universe cinematically or artistically, and actually kind of combing through it geographically and literally going on a literal journey. So those are all, again, good things. She's like talking about sticking to what we know already about Star Wars and crafting a story around what we know, rather than creating crazy new lore-breaking abilities or tactics, or even just kind of trying to fundamentally restructure what the Force is. You're sticking to what is Star Wars and what we already know about it, and then the fact that there are real places in Star Wars, and that we already know a lot about those places, but maybe we don't know everything about those places, and kind of exploring on that. And I think that's actually a really interesting idea. So Headland's comments are pretty good here. But we will see what we actually get. Saying something is one thing, actually doing it is another. So I'm kind of, this makes me a little bit optimistic. I was getting pretty down on Star Wars for quite a bit, especially after watching those first two episodes of The Mandalorian. But these comments are a little bit of hope here. But again, we will see what we get. And I just want to be clear, I'm not like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that these comments sound good, and they're a lot better than what we've been getting from Star Wars in TV and in the comics and every other kind of storytelling medium. But this is seems to be a good sign, but it also could be a false sign or giving us false hope. Because this might not be actually what we're getting. So we'll see what happens. Let me know what you think. My name is John Trent. You've been watching Bounding into Comics, and I'll have another video for you tomorrow.